Hey, it's Mariana, and thank you for joining me on the Commitment to Growth podcast, a platform dedicated to helping you build resilience for lifelong momentum. We chat about healing, mindset development, and how to live in your authentic truth, because often it's not our problems that cause our dissatisfaction, but everything around them that we haven't yet addressed. Thank you for joining me today, and let's get into this week's conversation. The wonderful and the wise Cheryl Richardson once said that if you avoid conflict to keep the peace, you start a war inside yourself. Now, if you're here today, there is a good chance that there's perhaps some kind of war waging inside of you right now, or you clicked on the title of this episode because you're ready to influence how you show up in the world in a way that honors you, and you're ready to start owning your no's and your yeses and really heal from the patterns in which you might be self-abandoning yourself for the approval or validation or love of other people. And I just think that that quote is so exemplary of what really happens when we ditch our needs and our desires in an attempt to be perceived by other people a certain way. So if you landed on this episode, on this page today, thank you so much for choosing the Commitment to Growth podcast as your daily source of wisdom and personal growth and inspiration, because not only could you have been doing literally anything else, but as I mentioned, odds are that if you're here, it's because you're ready to create some kind of change in your life. You are ready to step into empowerment, into self-reverence, into honoring who you are at your deepest. And not only do I want to thank you for trusting me to guide you through that, but I'm also super duper excited that we are launching this series on the podcast with this conversation. If you're new to the Community Growth podcast, welcome. And if you're not new, welcome back. In either case, this would be your first time tuning in on the It's Not That series on the podcast. This is a new recurring monthly conversation that I want to start facilitating on this platform. And we're going to really be focused on giving you a different angle to view some of the areas in your life in which you might be struggling with. It's been really, really beautiful planning ahead now that I want to focus the podcast and my business and how I show up on Instagram and TikTok around these kinds of themes in personal growth, self-discovery, self-empowerment, resilience cultivation, resilience development. And this month, as you can tell, as you may have heard me say on Instagram, if you follow me on Instagram, if you don't, it's at Commitment to Growth, and I would love, love, love to connect with you. But being that the theme this month was and has been healing the inner people pleaser, it's been really, really beautiful for me to just be really diving deep into some of these themes and seeing how my own wounding is at play in these topics and how I am looking to step up, learn from those wounds, heal from those wounds, to not only be in a place where we can heal together, but where I can help you facilitate your own journey as you guide yourself through these topics. So it's a super, super exciting revamp. After this episode, you will notice that, or you might have heard that we have some really, really exciting episodes centered around healing our inner people pleaser as well. I've got a super exciting interview with a burnout coach following this episode, and then of course our regular monthly Q&A, which will be centered in and around you asking all of your questions about how to heal inner people pleasing, self-abandonment wounds, how to step into that place of empowerment, not empowerment, how to learn how to set boundaries in a way that honors your relationships and creates spaces for you to grow with the people you love. So if you follow me on Instagram, as I mentioned earlier, you can follow me by looking at my handle in the show notes. If not, it's at Committed to Growth. Punch into your Instagram right now and hit that follow button. I will upload a question box at the end of every month, typically the last Thursday of every month, where you can submit your questions and I record the episode right away, pretty much either that day or that weekend. So you can expect it out for the first week of each month so that you start the month feeling beautiful and wonderful and aligned and ready for the next topic that we'll be breaching on the podcast. So make sure that you get your questions in. I believe it'll be April 25th that the question submission will go out on my Instagram story. So make sure you're tuned in. You turn on your story notifications 2 days before. I'll have the update out by then and get your questions in. It's really a time for you to submit things that you can get personal help with. They can be anonymous or you can submit your name for them. The themes for May and June are so exciting. May is going to be all about how we can start allowing more love into our lives. And June is all about purpose and aligned action and living. I'm so excited. So just something to hype you up and a little bit of an update for today's episode and for what to expect in the next few weeks and months here on the Commitment to Growth. Now, as I mentioned, if you're here today, it's because you have a mission. You have a place that you want to get to in life and within yourself that allows you to approach your relationships and your interactions consciously. And it's very interesting that we are recording this at the time that we are, because 2 days prior to this, today's April 10th, 2 days prior, April 8th, was the much anticipated solar eclipse. Now, if you're here today, again, you're creating that change in your life. And it's interesting because solar eclipses are a time for us to reflect and look at our shadows, the shadow selves that we have inside of us, the shadow selves that are guiding how we show up in unaligned action or failure to honor ourselves in interactions and relationships. And one key highlight of this eclipse was that motivation to release our fear of judgment and to really step into our truth from a place of alignment. And maybe you felt these shifts on Monday when the eclipse happened, or maybe you're feeling them right now. Think about if you can look at any areas of your life right now in which there's been that key theme to release your fear of what people are thinking about you, or if you've noticed yourself motivated to show up a little bit differently. And I don't really believe in coincidence, so I'm gonna boldly make the assumption that it's probably no coincidence that you are here today, that you clicked on the title of this episode, because maybe this is an area of your life where you are ready to release that fear and ready to step into something new. So I am just super duper excited to facilitate this conversation with you. It's going to be a deep dive. And I also really just want to hold space for the truth that these conversations around this kind of wounding that is rooted in self-abandonment and seeking love through perhaps unhealthy ways can be really triggering. This is going to be a deep practice, is going to be a deep listen, but I encourage you to walk in with no expectations. I don't want you to go through this experience with the idea that you have to walk out of here looking or feeling a certain way. I want to invite you to create space for the parts of you that are going to amplify their voice as you listen to this, as you go through the exercises that I have planned for you in this episode, because that's where healing starts. You remove the expectation from where you need to be and what your healing has to look like, and you create room for the wounds that want to make themselves heard. Because your body knows best, your heart knows best, your soul knows best. And I fully believe that when we surrender to that process of our body's kind of purging and detoxing of old energies, old wrapped up energies, is where we can make the most healing and our utmost potential. So I invite you to surrender. I invite you to allow me to hold your hand through this conversation. It's going to be filled with learning. It's filled with so much value. So if you're here and you're present, commit to being present, commit to staying here with me for this conversation, and commit to openness, because that is really the way that you're going to get the most out of what we're going to be talking about today. So, people pleasing. Folks, people pleasing, the name itself makes me just, ugh. How many of us can say that this is something that we are recovering from, that we are looking to evolve from? Hands up. If you're watching me on YouTube, put your hand up. I can't see you, but I know you're watching. And if you're listening on audio, put your hand up. Doesn't matter where you are, on the bus, at work, in your kitchen, put your hand up. That's probably why you're here, right? Now, I was a pre-med student, so I still have this tendency of thinking in science and cause and effect. So one way that I want to guide you towards considering the concept of people pleasing a little bit differently is in this way. People pleasing is like a diagnosis for the underlying symptoms that lead to people pleasing. Think about that for a moment. It's not that you are a people pleaser. You can label yourself as that, and I'm going to get into why we don't want to do that in a moment. But really, if you are a people pleaser, it's because you are displaying people pleasing symptoms or people pleasing behaviors. So I really want to get into the habit of us making this distinction because language drives thought. What I mean by that is, think about if you say to yourself right now, I am a healthy person. I am an athlete. I am a hard worker. I am a loving partner. As soon as you repeat those statements to yourself, think about or notice how your brain starts looking for examples that you enact in everyday life to fulfill the criteria for that statement. If you tell yourself you're a healthy person, you're probably going to say, oh yeah, like I wake up and drink water. I work out every day. I eat my greens every single day. But then all of a sudden you say, I am not a hard worker. I am not a healthy person. And your mind is going to be like, oh my gosh, yeah, right. The other day I only got 3 hours of sleep because I was looking at my phone. Or the other day I skipped my workout because I couldn't make it into the gym from the office. The same is true for when we say, I am a people pleaser. We start aligning ourselves with that identity, and it's much more likely that we undergo through this process of what's called confirmation bias, in that if we choose to align ourselves with that statement, with that stated identity, we will then enact the behaviors that confirm that right back to us. So you're going to say yes when you really mean no. You're going to self-abandon yourself in your interactions. You're going to go to the plans that you really didn't want to go to because you didn't want the energy, you didn't have the energy, et cetera, et cetera. So what I really want you to think about and really consider shifting into moving forward from today's conversation is saying things to yourself like, I have people-pleasing tendencies. Because what that does is it induces us to step into that process of confirmation bias, in that, oh, it's not that I'm a people pleaser, it's that I have these tendencies. And then you become way more aware of them and can look for examples of them in your day-to-day. So because you're here, there's a good chance that you have self-diagnosed yourself, or somebody else has told you, oh, you're a people pleaser. You got your diagnosis. Now, let me be your non-prescriptive people pleaser doctor, and let me guide you through how we can start to heal this ailment, this issue, this wound that you might be dealing with. People pleasing, let's define it first, is a trauma response from situations in our lives in which we learn to associate self-sacrifice with receiving love. One more time. People pleasing is a trauma response from the situations in our lives in which we learn to associate self-sacrifice with receiving love. How do you feel when you hear that statement? Are there any memories coming to the front of your mind right now? Just take a moment to reflect. Ways these associations can become ingrained in our neural networks, in our minds, is things like being shamed for emotional expression. I know that this is one that I have really, really struggled with. How many of us can think of a time in our childhood or adolescence even, in which a parent said to us in a time of crying or an angry outburst or just a lot of emotional expression, go into your room and don't come out until you're happy. Don't cry, be strong. Crying makes you weak. Just get over it already. It was just a bronze medal, could have been worse. Things of that nature, right? Where the utmost expression of the emotions that you wanted to feel were not welcome, or you were told that they meant one thing when they really weren't harmful to anybody around you. As well, things like good girl, good boy narratives. You're a good girl if you aren't assertive. You're a good girl if you wear your clothes neatly and you wear dresses on Sundays and you make sure that everybody at the table has their drink and food before you even consider going to serve yourself a plate. You're a good boy if you don't cuss. You're a good boy if you clean up your hair nicely for Sunday school. You're a good boy if this and that. These ideas that are fed into us about what it looks like and what we need to do to be seen as a good person in the eyes of society. Being called high maintenance or needy. Maybe you were taking a little bit longer in the shower than you needed to, or you have a skin routine or a makeup routine that is really, really valuable to you that makes you feel ready and set up for your day. And then somebody says, oh, you're taking so long. Why do you need so much makeup? Why do you need so much time to get ready? Why do you need so much attention to feel okay? Why do you need so much affirmation? As well, things like playing the mediator role in your family. If you came from an environment in which there was a lot of emotional outburst and you were always the one there and ready to help conflict dissipate or dissolve or make sure that everybody was okay following conflict, or if you were the one that had to meet everybody's needs before your own, maybe you came from a household in which money was really scarce, resources were really scarce, and because of that, you had to be the one to work really, really hard to maintain everybody. And because of the pressure of I have mouths to feed, I have bills to pay, all of a sudden you have to put your needs on the back burner to make sure that everybody else is okay. And lastly, being in spaces in which you were expected to show up a certain way in order for you to feel like you belong, or in order for people to tell you, hey, you're welcome here. So like dressing a certain way, speaking a certain way, having certain opinions. If you don't think that this political argument is okay, if you don't think macaroni and cheese is good, if you don't think that we're better than everybody, if you don't think that, I don't know, this celebrity is better than this celebrity is a thing, then you're not welcome here. Right? Those spaces in which we had to mold ourselves in order to feel like we could exist with the people around us. What you'll notice from all these examples that I just stated here is that the core theme or the core message that was transmitted through these examples, these experiences, was that everyone comes first before you. And isn't that truly at the heart of people-pleasing tendencies? It's, I can't think of myself first in this moment. I have to do whatever it takes to meet this person's needs, to answer in a way that is going to please this person before it pleases me. I can't even fathom disappointing this person. I have to disappoint myself first to avoid disappointing them. And I really want to hold space for you if any of these statements or examples resonated, because it's important to remember this is a learned response. As I mentioned earlier, you probably developed this coping mechanism because you learned to make the association at some point in your life that you had to act in this way to be loved, to be accepted, to be seen, to be heard, to belong. And that really touches at some of our most human and primal fears, right? Our belongingness, our acceptance into the group is directly tied to what our primal brain associates with survival. If I don't fit in, if I'm the lone wolf in the field, the lion's gonna come get me, right? I'm gonna stick out like a sore thumb. I'm super vulnerable. Everybody's going to know that it's just me, that I'm alone. And so I want to hold space for you because it's something that can bring up a lot of sadness for those parts of you. It can bring up a lot of resentment for the people that led us to create those associations in our mind. But what's beautiful here, and what I really, really want you to carry through this conversation, is that because it is a learned response, it can also be unlearned. And the way that we do that is by mastering the space between the stimulus and the response. What I mean by that is that space represents our capacity to allow our thoughts and our emotions to make themselves heard before we give a reaction. We want to be able to respond and not react. So in the moment that somebody triggers you, or you feel triggered to engage in people-pleasing behaviors, what's happening right before you act? How are you allowing your thoughts and emotions and your wounds to be heard for a moment, enough for you to respond from consciousness versus react from old tendencies? And that's really the exercise and the conversation that I want to guide you through today, because in mastering that space, we not only come closer to healing, we start showing up in life in a way that is directly aligned with our truth and our authenticity. Now, one other way that I want you to think about people pleasing, and I think this is really important to note, because believe it or not, people pleasing has a little bit of a, what we could say, self-centered component. And it is that really it's a double-edged sword. It's a subconscious double-edged sword, because if you think about it, as much as people pleasing is a trauma response in an effort for us to seek and receive love, it's also a way for us to control, or in some way attempt to manipulate, how other people see us through our actions. Really, it's to control how people see us through sometimes the actions that we don't want to do. For example, if I say yes to this plan that I'm being invited to, even though I'm like super, super tired, I just had like the longest work week of my life, my friends won't be disappointed in me and they'll think I'm super loyal and I'm always available. If I answer my girlfriend's 17th call complaining about her partner, even though I really don't want to and I don't have the emotional space for it today, she will think that I'm a good listener. She will think that I am loyal. If I agreed to take care of my friend's kids on this day after school, even though my own kids have things to do and I have things to do, she'll think that I'm a good mom. She'll think that I'm a good friend. And what this does is we start living our life through a perception of a perception. Think about that for a moment and really think about what that means. When we live through a perception of a perception, what we are doing is we are saying, well, if I answer my girlfriend's 17th call complaining about her partner, then she's going to think I'm a loyal friend and therefore I am a loyal friend. If I take care of my friend's kids after school, even though I have things to do, they're going to think that I'm a super helpful person, therefore I am a very helpful person. But why are we choosing to rely our validation and our self-concept on what we think people are thinking about us when we do certain things? Because really, we don't know. We don't actually know what's going on in people's heads when we do something, how they're receiving our actions, right? And with that too, I think as much as it pains me to say this, there are people who take advantage of you, and there are people who can see how busy you are and can see that you might be going through a really hard time in your life emotionally or physically, and they'll still ask you for things that they might know that you can't put on your plate right now. And if you show people that you self-sacrifice constantly, the wrong people will leverage that. It pains me so much to say that, but I think that at least we can say that at least at one time in our lives, we experienced that. We found out that maybe somebody asked us to do a favor for them because they gave us one reason to do it and they were actually doing something else. You agreed to take care of their kids because they had work, but they were actually out at a party or something, right? Or they asked you to take an extra load on the school project because they had gymnastics class, but really they were out hanging out with their friends or something, right? So we have to be the ones to set our own criteria for not only what we stand in, but if we only rely on the favors that we do for people, the acts of kindness that we do for people as telling of who we are and our value, then we are driving ourselves to the ground, right? We have to find other ways within ourselves to communicate that and to let people know that there are going to be times in which we do have the capacity for those things and sometimes that we don't, but that doesn't change who we are and what we're capable of. So a lot of people tell me that this is really nerve-wracking, right? I'm sure if you're listening, you're like, okay, great, Mariana, but I don't want people to think that I'm not helpful, that I'm not a kind person if I don't do these favors for them. What if my friend stops calling me about her partner and stops trusting with her ailments? What if my boss fires me because I said an opinion? What if my partner thinks of me less because I told them that it's Friday and I understand, but I just don't have the energy to go on that date today or something like that, right? I think a really beautiful and important example that I want to add into this conversation is one that was asked by a member of my Growth Hour Sisterhood last night during our Healing the Inner People class. Wow. One more time, folks. Healing the Inner People mess. In my Healing the Inner People Pleaser masterclass. Wow, say that 10 times over. Holy smokes. This member of my Growth Hour Sisterhood said something that I think was really, really important to consider as well. She asked, well, what about the times in which we can't have these conscious dialogues about our people-pleasing tendencies and the ways in which we're acting from? Because she was speaking as a daughter of immigrants, which I myself can relate to that. I'm a daughter of immigrants. She said in the corporate world, for example, you have to compromise on so many things to get up the ladder. You have to really, really people please for your efforts to be seen. You really, really have to go out of your way, and sometimes in a way that neglects your needs to establish yourself. And of course, that really pained me to hear, and I really want to hold space for this because I'm sure that this is something that a lot of the people listening can relate to. But in a perfect world, of course, we would be able to have these conversations consciously in a way that was contributing to everybody's capacity to feel heard and heal and create conscious communication. But it's not always the case because not everybody is open to these conversations. They're not as aware as you might be on your growth journey. And so when we can't when we can't have these conversations, when we can't go through the process that I'm about to guide you through in the moment, what's really important is the aftercare that comes from you recognizing that you had a moment of engaging in people-pleasing tendencies and doing the work to reflect on how you can show up differently or how you can engage a dialogue with the people involved that brings that up and honors where everybody's at and honors your experience so that moving forward, you can get as close to as you can, or hopefully smack dab on honoring your experience and honoring your needs and honoring how you wanted to contribute to that interaction or that project or whatever it may be. So I just really wanted to hold space for that and talk about it from that angle because it's not always perfect. Not everybody's going to be open to these conversations. And there are situations in life, unfortunately, in which there is that glass ceiling. There is that corporate ladder. And it's not that you can't show kindness and over deliver in order to establish yourself and your capacity. But it's such a fine line between you over delivering and exceeding expectations and self-abandoning and hurting yourself and your mental health and your physical health in the process. So let's chat about how we can go about mastering the space between the trigger and the temptation to people please, and how we can start engaging these conscious conversations of healing. And I want to do that first and introduce this idea to you through a quote that I heard recently from the wonderful and the incredible Dr. Neha Sangwan, who is a internal medicine doctor, and she has studied the physical manifestations of people pleasing. She has noticed in her research that people pleasing done persistently or even in acute episodes, you can get muscle tightness, neck and shoulder tightness, headaches, like chronically blurry cognition, like you're repeating instructions to people multiple times, you are losing your trains of thought because you're burning out, right? So one beautiful, beautiful definition that she gives in how we can guide our healing out of people-pleasing behaviors is she says, you want to take input from the outside world, but when it's time to make a decision, you turn up the voice of your own heart slightly louder than you can hear the voices of others. Wow. I'm going to say that one more time so it really, really sticks. You want to take input from the outside world, but when it's time to make a decision, you turn up the voice of your own heart slightly louder than you can hear the voices of others. What this example or what this quote is really getting at is that space between the trigger and the response that we give or the reaction that we give is where we have to turn up the volume on our authentic truth, on our authentic voice, on our needs, on our bodily sensations that are telling us, hey, you're deviating from your alignment. You're betraying yourself in this moment by giving that response or doing that thing. And when we do that work to come home to ourselves and to rely on our cues that are signaling to us that, hey, something's out of alignment here, or I feel like I'm about to act from a place that is outside of what I really want to say or what I really mean, that capacity translates into every single area of your life, be it communicating in relationships, in the workplace, in how you pick up on illness cues from your body, how you know that you're about to make a decision about life or work or your relationship that is out of alignment or in alignment with who you are and what you want. It is one of the most deep and fundamental skills that we can build as human beings, is the capacity to know and understand what our authentic truth is trying to tell us at any given moment. Now, I want to start this aspect of our conversation, this aspect of our guided work, by giving you a really extreme example of people pleasing. I'm somebody who healed people pleasing in a very extensive and extreme manner. So if you've been here long enough, you might have heard me talk about Martha Beck's book, The Way of Integrity. Martha Beck, if you don't know who she is, she's an author, an activist. She is incredible, has written some of the most beautiful works around self-improvement that I have ever read. And The Way of Integrity is the book that, if I had to give you one self-improvement book that you should read and that everybody should read, it is that one. Now, in this book, she talks about how her journey of integrity involved this 1-year challenge that she gave herself, in which in 1 year, she wouldn't allow herself just to tell a single lie. Even if it was like one of those white lies of like, oh, I don't know, I don't want an extra piece of cake, even though you do want an extra piece of cake. She didn't allow herself to lie for a whole year. And what that led to was her leaving the Mormon community, the very strict Mormon community that she was a part of. She left her marriage because she realized that she liked women. She left her husband, the father of her children. She was persecuted for leaving her religious community. Her works were severely criticized. It was just this explosive act of everything that she couldn't keep below the surface revealed itself. And I'm not here to say or give that example because I'm like, that's what's going to happen to you too. But what led out of that was this life that she is now living, in which she is living her truth and claiming it and preaching it and giving other people the tools to do the same. And I think why I wanted to share that with you is because let's just address the elephant in the room for a moment. There are going to be times in which people get upset at you for standing in your authentic truth. When you stand in the truth of who you are, it angers people. It makes other people uncomfortable. But the choice that we have to make is, are you willing to continue disappointing yourself? Or are you going to disappoint others before you disappoint yourself? As Glennon Doyle says. And this is one of those core decisions that we have to make when we go on this journey of healing our people-pleasing wounds. And I'll tell you my own experience. After I read that book, I was reading that book through a very transitional time in my life in which I was realizing and being driven to take a look at the areas in my life in which I was severely living out of alignment. I left a relationship in the time that I was reading that book. I was fired from a job over email at the time that I was reading that book. I transitioned careers when I was reading that book. Oh my gosh. It was a ride, but because I was being guided to the truth of who I am, I had to choose to embrace that and to stand in that. And by standing in that, I had to make the choice to ditch all the things that were driving me out of alignment with that. And what I started doing is that same promise that Martha made, is I stopped lying. Anytime that I didn't want to go to a reunion or a friendly gathering because I wanted to work on the podcast or my business, or because I just didn't have the energy. I was studying for my medical school entrance exam at the time when I started reading this book, and I was like always tired, always really busy. And yeah, I'll be honest with you, there were times where people were like, not cool, man. You always say no. Or why can't you take my call right now? Or don't be boring. Just come to the party. Like, just stay for 30 minutes. It's not that I didn't go every time, okay? I love going out. I love people. If you're listening, you know that. But there were times in which I really had to ask myself, what's more important right now? Go to the party, go to the reunion, lose sleep? Or what do I really want right now? Another really beautiful example that I can give you that happened recently is, as you may know, and if you haven't heard or listened, I just dropped an episode on this. It's called I Left Everything to Travel for 2 months. I was traveling Chile and Argentina with my best friend, Amy, who, by the way, has been on the podcast. I highly recommend you check out her episode. And Amy had already been traveling for a month prior to me arriving in South America. She'd been traveling Panama. And I'm a super go person. Like, I'm like, let's savor every single day. Like, let's get up early. Let's go do this and this and this. And I'll jam pack the day with like 5 activities. And I got to South America, flew in, saw her at our hotel. And the first thing she said to me is, I think we need to have a conversation around our energy levels. And she said to me, I'm at a period right now where I'm kind of lower on energy as far as like the social aspect, as far as having that drive to extract everything from a single day. But I know that that's where you are right now, and I need us to meet at some halfway point to both get as much as we want from this trip, but to honor where we're both at. And yeah, you know what? My first response to that was, I just got here. Are you freaking kidding me? All I want to do is see everything. We only have 2 weeks. Like, what's wrong with you? That was my ego talking. And I'm sure many of you can relate. That's probably the first voice that would have come up in your head too. Or you can probably think back to a time right now in which somebody expressed where they were at with you that was not aligned with where you were at. And you started having that similar dialogue. What's wrong with you? This and da da da. And just not the nicest things that you would say out loud, right? But you take enough space to analyze that for what it is, and you say, oh my gosh, the courage that it probably took that person to tell me that, to stand in that, to honor themselves. Because can you imagine what would have happened if she hadn't told me that, and then all of a sudden we're, I don't know, having dinner one day, or we're out on a walk and she snaps at me, or she says something that she didn't mean but came off really ill-intentional because she was burnt out and angry and tired. I really had to take stock in that moment and say, wow, I'm so glad that we are opening the floor to have a conscious experience of this travel trip where we are still honoring each other and getting as much out of the trip as we can. And that really is the goal of opening up conversation and becoming aware of the places and the wounds from which we are operating, is not to drive people away from us or to be hard and unmoved in our boundaries, because we can be flexible even when standing in our boundaries. But the question is, or the point here is, we want to create space for conscious conversation by speaking from our truth first in a way that drives other people to do the same. Because when you do that, how crazy and empowering is it that other people feel safe enough to do the same? And therefore, we're in conscious relationship where our truths are honored. So, again, Martha's example is a very extreme example, but I wanted to share that dialogue that I had with Amy with you, because you can fear the response that people might elicit when you stand in your truth. And yes, it'll make some people uncomfortable, but the people who want you to honor your truth and want to create a relationship of any kind with you that is founded upon both of your authenticities will choose to see past their ego and will choose to honor what you have to say and what you want to express as far as your needs in that moment. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into a 3-step process that you can use in the moment that you feel yourself engaging in people-pleasing tendencies as aftercare. If you walked out of a situation and said, oh my gosh, like I really acted from my people-pleasing behaviors in this moment, or if you feel safe enough to engage in this conversation with somebody, you can also use these questions as a template to guide how you breach this dialogue with this person. Now, there's only 3 questions here, and if you like them and enjoy them because they are super, super powerful and transformative and enlightening, I have a Healing the Inner People Pleaser workbook available on my website that is an extension of this conversation. And not only do you get these 3 questions, but you get another 8. So this workbook is comprised of 11 core transformative questions for you to shed light on your people-pleasing wounds, on your self-abandonment wounds, and for you to really unearth the seeds of memories and thoughts that are driving you towards enacting those people-pleasing behaviors, and how to change the thought pattern, change the belief, so that you can set conscious boundaries and stand in your nose and feel empowered while really creating space for that conscious conversation in your relationships. So stay tuned, listen to these 3 questions. And again, if you like them, I'll prompt you on how to get access to that workbook following them. So I'll give you this time to, if you want to jot these down in your notes app or a journal, hit pause right now, get out that notes app, get out that pen and paper, because you're going to want to jot these down because they're very, very powerful. So the first question I want you to ask yourself when you notice yourself engaging in people-pleasing behaviors, and when you're tempted to do it because somebody said something or something triggered you and those wounds are coming up, that anxiety is coming up, this first question is, what memory is dictating how I show up right now? What is the earliest memory in which you can remember learning that the response you want to give right now is the one that's going to guarantee you the love that you want or the acceptance that you want? For example, if you're feeling really emotional, you want to cry, you really feel called to express like some anger or frustration that you're having with a partner or a friend, but then you hide it, you shove it down because you don't want to be a burden, because you don't want to make them uncomfortable. What is the first time that you can recall having to do that? Whether in childhood or adolescence, just go back as far as you can in your memory storage and really pick out the seed. For me, you might have seen this video on Instagram. If you don't, I encourage you to go check it out. I recently posted a video where I was reading right from the pages of my personal journal. And I was reading this statement that I had reflected on, where I was saying, I am deeply afraid that my depth and my enthusiasm are too much for people. What happened a few days prior to that is I had a moment like that with somebody where I was asking them all these questions and I was really enthusiastic and I was just really enticed with getting to know them. And then I had this trigger of like, I'm being too much right now. I have to stop. And I sat in that and I stopped. Like, I just stopped asking questions. I like ended the conversation. And I walked out of that feeling really hurt at myself, really honestly shocked, because it wasn't something that I had experienced recently. And so I went into my journal and did my process that I use to really pick out the seeds that drive the behaviors that are out of alignment with how I really want to show up. And I realized that fear of being too much, that fear of scaring people away, came from this core belief that I am a distraction. That when I get too deep, it makes people uncomfortable. And that came from an experience some time ago where I was seeing somebody and we were having this dialogue about our past and the traumas that we'd been through. And this person said to me, why do you always focus on the negative? Why do you always choose to go into the deep stuff? Why can't we just be happy and focus on the happy stuff? And in that moment, I really took that and said, oh my gosh, like, I just made this person so uncomfortable. I just made this person like reflect on things that they didn't want to touch. Oh my goodness, I was so apologetic. And I took that as, I can't show up in this way because it's going to drive people away from me. Now, I don't say that at all to pin that pain and that association on that person. I say that to shed light on the fact that there are times in which, in an effort to secure certainty, to secure reciprocity, we mold ourselves according to how people tell us we are going to be received the best. But in doing that, we release our authenticity, we release our alignment. And what was really beautiful was coming to terms with that and then opening dialogue about that, which I'm going to talk to you about in a following question that I'll share with you. So, what earliest memory is dictating how you want to show up in a given moment where you are tempted to people please or self-abandon? The second question that I want you to ask yourself is, what do I want to say in this moment? And how does that reflect how I want to be perceived by others? One more time. What do I want to say in this moment? And how does that reflect how I want to be perceived by others? So we know what the memory is that is driving the response. What is the response that you are tempted to give right now? Are you tempted to say yes when you mean no? Are you tempted to do a favor for somebody, like take out their dog or take care of their kid or take on that load from the school project or the work project off their hands because they asked you to, when you're really actually tired and you have way too much on your plate? Are you tempted to give your buddy another counseling session about their partner or their finances when you really don't have the emotional capacity to? What is the behavior that you are tempted to enact right now? And how does that reflect how you want them to see you? If I do this favor for my neighbor to take out their dog, they're going to see me as kind. If I take that project off of my coworkers' hands, they're going to see me as capable and efficient and responsible and hard-headed and disciplined. Why is it valuable for you to be seen that way in their eyes? What is telling you that that is the only way that you're going to secure love from those people and acceptance from those people? So really, it's about identifying the seed, how the seed is sprouting the behaviors that we're tempted to engage in, and how the birth of those seeds is reflecting our fear, right? Of how we want to be perceived, or how we perceive that the way other people see us is going to secure our love from them. So once again, what do I want to say in this moment? And how does that reflect how I want to be perceived by others? That's question 2. Question 3, last but not least, is how can I communicate my fear of rejection to this person right now in a way that honors my authentic truth? There is something so beautiful and beautifully vulnerable and strong when we are honest about how our fear might be driving us to show up in a way that we don't want to show up in. I think we feel so pressured to show up perfectly all the time, to have the answer and the solution to our healing before we enter an interaction or a conversation. But how beautiful would it be if we opened a space in our relationships for our fears to be discussed, for our insecurities to be discussed, so that collective healing could occur? Touching back on what I mentioned from question 1, when I really reflected on that memory of being told, like, you're so dark and you're so, you're like way too deep for what I want to be talking about right now, which I think I also want to say that's valid. That's a way of setting a boundary, right? That's a way of that person not people pleasing, but what followed that was the association that I made in my brain. And what wasn't right was the association that I made in my brain about, oh my gosh, like that makes me less lovable if I do so, right? So I identified the seed and then wrote what I shared with you in my journal. And then I actually went back to the person that had triggered that emotion for me, and not in a bad way. We were talking and we got into deep conversation, and then that seed came up, and I was honest with them. I told them about how I was feeling. I told them about the experience that led to me doing that, and how that experience of being called too much, essentially, was driving me to pull away from this person, was driving me to want to shut down and run the other way, because I was so afraid that if I had said something remotely wrong, or if I breached something that was uncomfortable for them by accident with well intentions, they were going to pull away and they were going to see me as too much. And it turns out that that person was feeling the exact same way. And I had no idea. I can't even describe the healing that occurred in that moment, the compassion that was shared in that moment between that person and I, because all of a sudden you're shedding light on the things that want to keep you small, that you're tempted to allow to dictate how you show up. But all of a sudden you make each other conscious of these patterns, and you can hold each other accountable and help yourselves heal from them together. Because now both of you know where you're at. Both of you know what's running through your mind when you get into deep conversation, or you are touching on maybe darker subjects in this example, right? I can check back in with this person now and say, hey, I just want you to know that I'm here. I do want to go through this journey with you so that I can get to know you better, so that we can work this out together. How beautiful is that? And you can have that same influence in your relationships. You can open that space for healing for the people in your life as well, because it's within all of us. It's within us to show others that we want to love them better by loving ourselves better, and doing so by standing in the honesty of where we're at. Could you say, I don't really have the emotional capacity right now, but I'm afraid that you'll think I don't want to support you when your girlfriend calls and wants to talk about their partner for the 17th time or vent about them, right? Could you say, I really want to share this space with you and I really want to have this conversation, but I'm afraid that if you see me from my past or you hear about my past experiences, you're going to pull away from me. I really want to walk your dog for you, but I'm feeling really tired today. I had a really demanding day at work, and I'm really afraid that if I say no, you're going to think that I don't love you or that I don't love your dog. How can you stand in the truth of who you are, despite what you might be capable of doing for someone right at a given moment, right? Maybe you are too tired to walk their dog. Maybe you are too emotionally fatigued to take that phone call for the 17th time. Allow your truth to shine through your intentions and through your honesty when you can't pour from your empty cup. Because the honesty that you stand in and the honesty about yourself that you communicate to others is what establishes trust and builds relationships and allows other people to stand in their same truth. Those are the 3 questions that you can pull out at any single time that you are tempted to engage in people-pleasing behaviors and really, really amplify the voice on your heart and on your authentic truth. If you enjoyed that practice, once again, I have an 11-part workbook available on my website called the Healing the Inner People Pleaser Workbook. It is 11 questions. These 3 that you just heard today are in that practice. 11 questions dedicated to helping you go into those seeds, extract them, see how they're feeding into the areas of your life in which you're acting out of alignment, and work to change those behaviors to step into alignment and foster conscious relationships where your truths are honored. So I will link the website page in the show notes for you to go and get access. From now, the launch of this episode, until May 15th, that workbook is only $7.77. $7.77 because 7 is my lucky number. And I want this to be as lucky and as juiciness filled as I possibly can make it for you. So head to my website, the link in the show note, and grab your copy of the workbook because it is truly transformational. It is truly so, so powerful. And if you're ready to become aware of the ways in which you are betraying yourself, in the ways that you are acting out of alignment, and start being a magnet for the goodness that can come into your life when you live from that place of authenticity, that workbook is your one-way ticket to living a life of abundance from your utmost truth. So go grab it. It's a fantastic resource. It's super fun. I designed it myself, and I am so, so excited to finally share it with you. And once again, thank you for joining this practice because you could have been doing literally anything else. But today, you committed to growth. And you committed to healing. You committed to changing. You committed to choosing change. And that is the first step towards living the life that you desire. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you hit like, you subscribe, send it to a friend that needs to hear it, and because it's going to help them too. If you know somebody who's healing from people pleasing in your life right now, send it to them so we can spread the message and just have this movement grow as much as we can. Make sure to check back here for the following episodes that are going to follow the Healing the Inner People Pleaser series here on the podcast. Check out my Instagram. It's at Commit to Growth, so that you can get in on all the people-pleasing content that is coming out for the next month of April as you're listening to this, and for the exciting stuff that I've got planned for you on our next themed months that are coming up. So make sure you follow, send me a DM if you enjoyed this episode. Let me know if you tried the exercise and what came up for you and how you're healing. And such a pleasure, such a privilege to be here with you as always. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next episode.